A documentary that is now screening in cinemas across Australia is a really fascinating documentary called Ego, the Michael Gudinski Story. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the producer of this documentary, Bethany Jones. Bethany, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thanks, Peter. It's great to be here.
Now, this is an incredible documentary because there's so much covered about Michael Gudinski's life. It's incredible. The music scene basically is covered in Australia in this documentary. What are the origins of the film? How did it all come about?
I actually started before Michael had passed. There was conversations between Michael and Paul to look at doing a 3 to 4 part television documentary series on the Mushroom Group, the 50 years of Mushroom. And, sadly, that never kind of came into fruition, partly because we hit COVID and then Michael passed. And so Paul never got to do a very long form interview with Michael. After his passing, we realized that Michael himself was such a big character. He had big ideas, and to tell his story, we kind of thought it was fitting that we put it on the big screen. So we kind of shifted the focus to be more about Michael as opposed to the broader Mushroom Group. But I mean, the two are so intertwined that it's sometimes hard to separate them. But yeah, we thought that telling Michael's just incredible life and career was something worthy of a theatrical film.
And it certainly is a really well-researched and intricate theatrical film. It's incredible how much there is. Tell me about the research that was undertaken, especially some of the archival stuff, because Michael, of course, with his Jewish background and fleeing the Nazis, the family and all that sort of thing. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, we were incredible. We had quite a big research team. We had Paige McGinley, who headed up our archive researcher, so was an archive producer. And she has just got such a depth of knowledge of the Australian music scene, and also just loves the archive and unearthing rare and never seen before footage. She has also worked at the Arts Centre on the Music Vault, so has that real love of it. We also had Jeff Jenkins and Jane Rocco, who are both music journalists as well, come on board to really help us unearth some of those stories, and also all the research around all the people we were interviewing as well. So yeah, we were quite lucky, and Paige obviously had another team around her. So there was a lot of people trawling through hours and hours and hours of archive. I mean, Michael was not shy of the camera, so we were pretty lucky.
Certainly that is the case. He's front and center in so much of his documentary. Sara Edwards, I think, was one of the writers, as well as Paul Goldman and yourself. You're all involved. So tell me about plotting the documentary, because there's so much going on, and having it as a cohesive sort of narrative is very important.
Yeah, that's right. And I think something like this film, it really was shaped in the edit. With most documentaries, you need to have flexibility around what information that will come up along the way from when you're interviewing someone. They may just tell you something that you didn't know at all, and that kind of helps shape the way you're tracking through the story and the connections. And one of the things that we really wanted to display and get the audience to understand and feel is Michael's energy and just how he moved through life. I mean, he was fast paced, he was loud, he was funny, he was irreverent. So kind of making sure that we can kind of get that tone in the film and kind of give the audience a sense of what it was like to be in Michael's company was something that was quite important to us. And so I think, that was kind of a bit of a guiding principle. And we were really influenced by films such as Senna and Maradona and A Kid Stays in the Picture, from that narrative point of view, and getting Michael to tell his story in his own voice. And so, as you can imagine, for Sara, that was a huge challenge, trying to find all the pieces of archive that could fit together. And Michael's voice, changed quite a lot over the years. So he goes from a very eloquently and well-spoken young man to, sometimes gruff, and you couldn't, as Sting says, you couldn't even understand what he said half the time, So for Sara, we made it doubly hard for her, but she's done an incredible job.
Absolutely, she certainly has. You all have, in fact, and it's interesting how Michael was such an advocate for Australian music and Australian talent, and also for Indigenous talent as well, Archie Roach and so on. I found that such an important part of the documentary.
Yeah, and he really was. And as he says in the documentary, he wasn't doing it just for Indigenous, releasing Indigenous music for the sake of it. He really was close to his heart, and he does acknowledge Archie Roach as being incredibly influential, and they had a really great relationship, Michael and Archie, that went on for years and years and years. And I think it is that kind of sense that when you come from a background like Michael did, with his family having to flee to Australia, I think there is a real empathy and understanding for people that have also suffered. And I think that is a crucial part. But equally, as Christine Anu says, it really is the real sound of Australian music.
Absolutely. And I even was impressed with the use of animation in the documentary.
Yeah, we had some incredible animators working with us, Kiki and Andreas, and again Paul Goldman, who knew Michael since 1978. They have had a very long and sometimes tumultuous relationship, Michael and Paul, and I think Paul's sense to try to bring that irreverence and that fun that Michael was is kind of shown in the use of the animation and kind of making sure that we're, entertaining and having a good time.
Absolutely. I love the way the documentary talks about the Sunbury Music Festival, which was such an important component of Michael's sort of background, and how interesting that was.
Yeah, I know, right? Making more money selling watermelons than he did stage managing. and to be honest, I could not. It was so hard to keep a straight face and be quiet when we were interviewing Michael Chugg and Jimmy Barnes and them telling their stories about being at Sunbury. I mean, it sounds like a very wild time, and I'm very jealous that I didn't get that same experience there.
I mean, it's incredible to think that festival is over 50 years old. It's just amazing.
Yeah, and I think it really is seen as, in a way, the birth of Australian music, Sunbury. I mean, don't imagine that at the time anyone thought that this was going to be such a kind of pivotal event in Australian culture. But looking back now, you can kind of see how it really did start to promote Australian artists and tell people that yes, you could actually put on a great festival with Australian acts.
Absolutely, Australia's Woodstock. So now there's so many interesting people who are interviewed, and you've already alluded to some of them already, but including Kylie Minogue, of course, and Bruce Springsteen and Ed Sheeran and so on. There's so many and interesting people. Tell me about harnessing those people and getting them filmed.
Yeah, it was a bit of a dream come true, I have to say. Just casually one day we're interviewing Sting, and then Bruce Springsteen and Billy Joel and Kylie, Ed Sheeran. Wow, yeah, still pinch myself to this day. But look, I think just because of Michael's ability to foster and really nurture these relationships with a lot of these artists, it was surprisingly easy, I have to say. When we put out the request, it was just a matter of fitting into people's schedules. They were incredibly generous to us to make time, like Sting and Billy Joel took time off on their tours to say, yep, come in, we'll get a camera crew, that's all great. So yeah, and Dave Grohl obviously as well. And it speaks volumes, I think, to Michael's ability to really connect and maintain these relationships.
Absolutely, and that certainly comes through. And I mean, mushroom records, mushroom music, it's such an important part of Australia's music history. And I'm so glad how well that is covered, as you've already mentioned, that it was originally going to be a documentary on mushroom. And of course, it's now become a really interesting doco on Michael. Tell me about covering all of that, because there is so much that happened during that time.
Yeah, you make a really good point. We had so much material, and there is Michael kind of almost lived 5 lives in one. He really just packed a lot in, and so we had to make the decision very early on about what to leave out of the film, and that was hard. There was lots of great stories that we just couldn't get into 100, and we were originally planning to make it 100 minutes. It ended up being 110, but and things like Michael's involvement with film like Chopper and Boys in the Trees and Killing Ground and Wolf Creek and Getting Square. That's a whole other aspect that we couldn't cover. There were some incredible artists that we couldn't even cover because again, there was so many. And so we did really make the decision early on to talk specifically about Michael and his involvement with music, and that this ambition to try to take Australian music to the world, because I really think that is, in a way, Michael's legacy, and the thing that he has left for all of us is the creation. And he's not the only one, of course. There were really other key people involved in the creation of the Australian music industry. But, he's one of the few people that have been there since the birth and evolution of the Australian music industry. And I think that's kind of why we decided to really sharpen that focus.
Fully understand that, and again, that comes through so well. And frontier touring is such an important aspect of Michael's work, and of bringing artists to Australia, as well as the reverse. And I found that so interesting.
Oh, it's fascinating, endlessly fascinating. And I think, this was partly the flip side. While we're creating an Australian industry, in order to really sustain and support that industry, I think the international touring becomes a really key part. I know that Michael was always really passionate about ensuring that when an international artist came here, they would use local crews, they could use local equipment, because, at that level, once they were being able to support those other businesses that sit around the music industry that we might not think about, staging and just amps and all that type of thing. So it meant that when Australian artists were touring, the industry was sustained, and they could also have access to incredible crews, incredible equipment, so it does become this kind of ecosystem for the music industry. And I think it also makes sure that people are getting out and having a good time and can see world-class music in Australia.
Exactly. It's so interesting to note as well that radio stations, which were very conservative and hidebound with overseas acts and American performers, all that sort of thing, how Michael made sure that he pushed Australian performers and singers and so on. And I found that so interesting as well.
Yeah, Bob Smeaton, who's a director in the UK, he directed the Beatles anthology, and he did some of our key interviews for us in the UK. And Bob obviously read our treatment, and he still couldn't believe that Australian, the Australian radio wasn't playing Australian music. He's like, I just can't understand how that was happening back then. And sometimes it takes us a bit of a reflection to think, oh yeah, there has to be people that really do champion and push and sometimes ruthlessly go for a change to make sure that we were actually getting access to the incredible artists that exist in Australia.
Exactly. It's interesting how musical tastes do change, and of course, later on with Michael, I mean, you sort of cover this where things start to get a bit more difficult, and he leaves Mushroom and all that sort of thing. There's a whole range of things, and his son is involved in the documentary. Tell me about that balancing of sort of some of the perhaps more unfortunate or unhappy circumstances.
Yeah, look, I think that the family have been incredible. They really gave us creative freedom to tell this story. And, you know, I think Michael was a risk taker, you know, and he understood that if you're going for something big, you can also equally fail, you know. And I think that was part of his that kind of nature, and that what sustained him for so long, because it was that, yeah, sure, I'll give it a crack. It may work, it may not work, you know. And so he wasn't shy of his failures in that sense. And I think that is something that I suppose, you know, is really an inspiration, because it takes a lot of guts, I think, to be a risk taker and a gambler, you know. And I think as Red says, you know, he joked about comparing it to horse racing, but taking a punt. But yeah, it makes you understand in your own life, oh, there's times when we just need to give it a crack. And I hope that people feel inspired by that story, actually, because, you know, we can always probably do with a few more risk takers.
Absolutely.
In Australia to try to put things.
Fully endorse that. We need to take risks. They're very important. When the documentary was completed, how did Matt, his son, and other family members respond to the final version?
Yeah, look, they're very happy with it. I think for them, it's also been quite an emotional journey. You know, Michael only passed, you know, 2 years ago. And for many people that we spoke to, it was the first time that they were speaking publicly about Michael since he passed. So, you know, it has been quite an emotional ride for a lot of people, and a lot of people who work in the music industry too. You know, we've had a number of screenings in which people have left in tears, because, you know, that kind of sense that we have captured that energy and that spirit of Michael, and it feels like he's in the room with you again, you know. And for that, I think that, yeah, for a lot of people, it felt quite an emotional journey.
It certainly is. And I love the way you titled the film Ego, the Michael Gudinski Story. I think that that sort of makes it front and center about what Michael was all about.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure he'd equally love it and hate it that we called it that. But yeah, look, I think it's, you know, as the Skyhawks say, it's not a dirty word, you know. You need a lot of ego and bravado and confidence to get up and do these things and to have ambition. And sometimes that can tip into ruthlessness and drive and all that type of thing. And, you know, self-promotion, and Michael was good self-promotion, but it's those qualities that actually allowed him to really create an environment in which we all benefit from now, you know. And I think, you know, it's good to put it front and center and not be afraid, because in Australia we obviously do a lot of the tall poppy syndrome, and I think you know, America is very good at promoting itself and promoting its own, and I think, you know, Australia could actually benefit from a bit more ego too.
Absolutely, of course, you have to have that strength of courage and conviction and so on to drive things forward. And certainly, Michael did that. And it's interesting in Australia too. I mean, the film premiered at the Melbourne International Film Festival. That there is a strong appetite for documentaries in Australia, and we've seen already with the John Farnham documentary that's done really well. And you'd have to assume that now that the film is on release in Australia, that Ego, the Michael Gudinski Story, will also hit a nerve and will get a huge audience.
We hope so. I mean, it's opening week this weekend, and so I would just say everyone get along and see it. because and John Farnham, that's an incredible story, and to see that performed so well, I actually got really excited, because I think it is that Australians do want to still hear stories about themselves and their own culture and the people that have been trailblazers. And I think it is incredible, and it's so exciting to see audiences going out and supporting, just like music. It's great to see the fans going out and supporting Australian music, and I would say it's great to see all the fans going out and supporting Australian cinema too.
Absolutely, and the best place to see a film like this, of course, is in a cinema with the with good sound system, great visuals, all that sort of thing. Yeah,
and cranked up to 11. Yeah.
Okay, I love it. Now, I assume the film will also have overseas currency.
We hope so. We're just talking about our international releases yet, so stay tuned. But yeah, look, I think Australian music is well known in the rest of the world, and as I said, we've got some incredible artists. I mean, Vance Joy is just killing it overseas in terms of his prominence and connection with his fans, and the Temper Trap, obviously, as you can see in the documentary too, are really well known and engaged there, and we have some incredible songwriters and musicians here, and I think Australian music is really well respected outside of Australia, and that's something that I think a lot of Australians may not know, just how incredibly respected Australian music is outside of Australia.
That is really great to hear. And Bethany, I'm interested because you also was involved. You were involved in the production of Molly, Molly the Real Thing, the miniseries, and so on. So that sort of music history, that must have been quite fascinating for you as well.
I'm a sucker for Australian music. I'm not going to lie. I'm a big fangirl. So yeah, look, being able to be involved in telling these really incredible stories from Molly and Michael, it actually has been a bit of a dream come true, to be honest. I feel very lucky to be involved in telling these stories that were quite pivotal to Australian culture, and I mean, both just great, hilarious men who had an ambition and drive to see something change, and I look forward to really being involved with a lot more music projects. We recently did the Ed Sheeran live at Wembley. We went over and filmed Ed Sheeran at Wembley Stadium and made that too. So music's always going to be in our DNA here.
That's interesting to hear that. I was going to ask you about future projects, and I can imagine there'd be a whole section too about women in Australian music, because that perhaps needs a bit more exploration, maybe.
Yeah, it does. And there's some incredible women that have been front and center, like FIFA at Alberts, and Amanda Pellman, who appears in our documentary as well. And then obviously, incredible artists like Renee Gayer and Deborah Conway, and Tina Arena and Delta Goodrum. These are all people that are very high profiled artists that I'm sure will have a story one day made about them.
Excellent. Australia has a rich music history that needs to be documented, and I'm so glad that Ego, the Michael Gudinski story, documents so much of the Australian music industry. And we've been speaking to the producer, Bethany Jones. Bethany, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you so much, Peter, and I hope it inspires you to go and sing your favourite Aussie tune.
Will do. Thanks so much for talking with me.
Thanks, Peter.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.